Clement Mielescu, an ex-Google engineer, released this amazing video talking about all the projects he submitted to Google for his interview. I'm absolutely mesmerized by his content, so it's no surprise that I set myself goals to complete some of these projects. My family and I are planning to do a road trip along Canada's east coast after quarantine ends, and one of the companies we looked at for campsites in national parks is called Koa. Then it struck me, one of Clement's projects was creating his own custom programming language. So there, the language, Koa with a C, was born, named after a camping company. I managed to come up with a nifty acronym for Koa code: clause-based arithmetic and operation code. I'll get to why the C stands for clause-based later. So there, Koa code was born, my very own programming language. Now, all that was left to do was actually create and code the language itself, to explain how it works onto the whiteboard.
Computers have their own language called machine code. It consists of ones and zeros, which is pretty much unintelligible to humans. Fortunately though, humans don't need to write code in ones and zeros. Instead, we write code in something called a high level language. Alright, so we don't need to write code in these ones and zeros. We can write it in a high level language. Alright? Then, these high level languages, some examples would be Python, JavaScript, C++, and there's a lot of them. Alright? And then when you write code in this high level language, it compiles this code. Alright? And then it executes this code. Alright? So, what does compiling actually mean? Well, compiling is just taking this high level language and translating it for the computer to understand it. And then executing it is converting it back to a result. Alright? So executing right here is the CPU has something called an ALU. Alright? And this ALU stands for an arithmetic logic unit. Alright? An arithmetic logic unit. And this basically decides whether the operation is logical or math related or arithmetic. Alright? And then based on that, it performs the corresponding operation. And for example, if I wanted to do I don't know, 2 plus 3, it would go to the arithmetic logic unit right here, and then it would decipher that okay, it's math, and then it would execute it and print out the result, which is 5. Alright, so that's the basics. Alright, so let me show you a little bit of how code looks like. Alright, so I'm just gonna use Python here like this. So this basically just prints out hello world to the console. Alright, so the steps, what's happening right here is I'm writing in a high level language. Alright, it's changing this to machine code, ones and zeros, also known as compiling like this, and then it's executing the code like that, and then therefore the output we would get is hello world. Alright? So that's a simple execution of a program, and that's basically how programming languages work.
In my case, though, I don't need to do that. Python is handling all that hard work of memory and processing and all of that, and all I have to do is create the language based on Python. So I'm just gonna write Python code that takes in functions from a file and then executes it. And for that, I need to create an interpreter. So I mentioned before that my program will be running on a file, and that file will be interpreted using Python code. So all I'm doing, I'm not creating my own programming language from scratch. I'm creating it using Python. Alright? So what's gonna happen is that I'm gonna have a text file, alright? And that text file is gonna be interpreted using Python and generating an output. Alright, so I'm basically creating the syntax and everything like that, but I'm not actually doing the hard work of going to the CPU and the executing processes based on what the ALU discretes and that kind of stuff. So I don't need to be worried about all of that. And then after the code interprets it, it's gonna go and show an output. So that interpretation is what I'm gonna be talking about right now. So how it's gonna work, it's gonna take each line, it's gonna parse it, and it's gonna look for keywords. And each of those keywords is gonna be sort of an identifier to the code to perform a certain function call. Now that we've covered all the technicalities of programming languages, now it's time to see my programming language. Here's Koa code.
So here is Koa code in all its glory. Alright? So there's multiple files, and I'm gonna explain what all of them do in just a second. I'm also gonna explain what all the folders are and what in the world is REPL.it here. So let's start with that actually. So REPL, it is a web-based development environment where you can write code and stuff like that, and in any language basically, Python, C++, C Sharp, Lua, JS, whatever, you name it. And they also provide web-based hosting. So if you were to create like a web-based application with Python and Flask, then they will actually give you a URL, and you can go and visit that URL and prototype your changes online, which is pretty cool. Alright, so here we have main.py, and main.py just renders the shell, and a shell is basically somewhere where you can type in commands and see an output, so input and output, the input-output cycle. Alright, and this shell, let it just install packages. Okay, alright, so this shell is a custom shell, so you can enter commands here. Let's type in help. It gives you all the possible commands that are here. Right now I only have exec and of course help. And another cool thing is here it doesn't repeat help for info again because you've already typed it, so it just says enter command. So it's just a really simple shell, and this is not really the star of the show. It's really, really simple. Anybody can do this. Anybody that has enough experience in Python. But here is where the cool stuff starts. So this is shell.py. Alright? This is what actually parses the program in program.txt. We'll get to that in a second. But this takes that and makes it so that the code can actually understand it. So it gets the keywords, it looks for certain indentations, it looks for certain variable names, stuff like that. It looks for a whole bunch of stuff that the code needs to function. And then it returns a filtered list of all the filtered pieces of code. So everything that's relevant. If I were to type in here like that, alright, that it would just ignore because that's not a keyword. Alright? So then we'll get to program.txt now. So program.txt is where you actually type your code. And I will explain what this dash dash undeclared and dash dash declared means in just a second. But then you can also do these basic operations like summing. You can do if statements. So if 4 is less than 5, then it will return true. And if it wasn't less than 5, then it would say not. Alright, I could change this to like nope, or it is not equal, or something like that. Alright, but I'm just gonna keep it not because that's very simple. And then you can also set variables here. So you can do, for example, I could set x to be 5, I can set the variable z to be 7, and then right now you can't do anything with those. That will be in future episodes. But when you run it, you can see in variables.csv, it wrote this variable z with the value of 7 here. Alright, then you can also do for loops. So what a for loop is, it's basically iterating this number of times. Alright, so it's running that many times. So, and then what this does is if I type in for j in 6, alright, it's going to run this 6 times. It's going to print j 6 times. Alright, so the first one is for I in 5. So I will start at 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. And as you can see that here, sorry, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, because this is 5 times. And then as you can see here, this is the first loop. And then for I in 4, 0, 1, 2, 3. Then for j in 6, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So does 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Alright? Then let's get into the interpreter. And this one is a much more complex piece of code. Alright, this took me ages to get. And it is actually pretty short right now because I have very little functionality in this programming language. It has basic functionality and that's about it. It's quite short but very complex. So what it's doing is it's actually parsing, which is basically decoding the list that the shell interpreted here. So it's parsing that further to look for certain keywords, and then if those certain keywords match what it's supposed to be looking for, then it will perform the corresponding operation. For example, if the keyword was, let's say, sum here, alright? So then it says, okay, sum means it has to perform an operation. And then what operation does it has to perform? Well then, it has to perform sum. And then we need to add this, alright? And then we have conditionals, same thing, and loops, same thing. Conditionals are the if statements you saw. If something happens, then do something, alright? Then, in order to understand how this works, I'm going to explain the overall principle of clauses. So, in my code, in my programming language, you have this thing called clauses. And clauses basically are pieces of code that have certain properties. Blocks of code that have certain properties, alright? So think about it like this. I have a child, alright? I'm a parent and I have a child, alright? And that child can get properties from me, like genes. For example, if I'm very athletic or I'm very energetic, the child will get properties of athleticism and energy, alright? So it's inheriting those properties from the parent. So that's exactly what's happening here. This block of code in this dash dash undeclared clause is inheriting the data from that clause. So the dash dash undeclared clause has data which you cannot set variables in. So it's basically saying everything here you cannot set variables in there because that's why it's undeclared. You cannot declare variables in here. This is more of like just like input output input output input output, as you can see here. Alright? However, the declared clause allows you to actually set these variables here. Alright? So if I were to type in set x5 in here, rerun it, see, it just ignores it. It's not going to do it because And if you even check that with here, okay, let me just change it to like, I don't know, set y to 3. So I'm going to show you that in a second, alright? So it's setting y to 3, alright? So if I run it, and I execute it, alright? If you go to variables.csv, you see here, it hasn't set y at all. So that's what the clauses are. So later on, I'm going to add the functionality to create your own clauses. Alright, so you could do something like my underscore clause, and it could have certain properties. So it could have properties of like setting, and then you could also get, and then printing. So you got what I'm trying to say. Alright, and then you can put a colon, and everything under here will run. Alright, so that's basically what that is right now. And that's why I have this declare.py file. What it does is it loads it. Alright, so think about clauses if you're really good in programming, like classes and a constructor argument. If you aren't good in programming, don't worry about this. And think about clauses like classes and constructor arguments. It inherits properties from something else that has a similar constructor argument. Alright, so that's basically what this means. Alright?
Thanks for watching episode 1 of me creating my own programming language from scratch. If you want to see more of these, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any videos, and like them if you appreciate my content. Thank you for watching.